Every great empire in history has shared a common delusion, the belief that they have somehow reinvented money. They all thought they were different, that they had created a new paradigm. And every single one of them eventually learned, the hard way, that they had not. Because money, you see, operates under a set of deep, unyielding laws that have absolutely no regard for politics, grand promises, or the boundless optimism of a rising power. These are not the laws you will find written in any constitution, nor are they taught in any university classroom. They are ancient principles, discovered through crisis, forgotten in times of prosperity, and then painfully rediscovered when everything falls apart. If you are not aware of these rules, you will forever be left wondering why the entire system feels like a game rigged against you. Tonight, we are going to pull back the curtain and expose these forgotten laws, from the cheapened coins of a falling Rome to the sophisticated digital deceptions of modern central banks. And by the end, you will understand that the game was never meant to be fair in the first place. Let us begin with the most fundamental and, frankly, most brutal principle of them all, Gresham's Law. Back in the 1500s, a wise advisor named Sir Thomas Gresham laid it out for Queen Elizabeth I in the simplest of terms. Bad money drives out good. The logic is elegantly simple. When two forms of currency are forced to have the same value, but one is intrinsically better than the other, people are not idiots. They will eagerly spend the inferior money and hoard the valuable kind. Consider the Roman Empire. As emperors gradually diluted the silver content of the denarius with cheaper metals to fund their extravagances, the citizens caught on quickly. They would pay their taxes and settle their debts using the new, junk-filled coins, while the older, purer silver coins vanished from circulation, tucked away safely under floorboards. This exact pattern repeated itself across medieval Europe, as kings would shave off the edges of gold coins or secretly mint new ones with copper cores. The lesson is timeless. The moment a ruler tries to cheat the system by debasing the currency, the people will adapt. They will spend the fake and save the real. And once this behavior takes hold, the entire foundation of trust in that money begins to crumble. But Gresham's Law has a chaotic, almost diabolical twin, which brings us to our second rule, Thiers' Law. Formulated by the French politician Adolphe Thiers in the 19th century, it describes what happens when the slow decay of money suddenly accelerates into a full-blown collapse. In these moments of sheer panic, the logic completely inverts. Good money violently drives out the bad. Picture the Weimar Republic in the 1920s. The value of the German mark was evaporating so fast that prices were doubling every few days. People were famously hauling wheelbarrows overflowing with banknotes just to buy a single loaf of bread. In that kind of hyperinflationary nightmare, absolutely no one wanted to hold onto the official currency for a moment longer than necessary. They stampeded into anything with tangible value, be it US dollars, gold, cigarettes, or simple barter. The worthless paper money was tossed aside. We have seen the same tragic story play out in Zimbabwe, in Venezuela, and in countless other nations where faith in the currency was utterly annihilated. If Gresham's Law describes the slow, creeping sickness of money, Thiers' Law describes its sudden, catastrophic death. So, what governs the vast, murky territory between that slow decay and total system failure? This is where we encounter the Cantillon effect, a law that brilliantly explains why inflation never feels fair, because it is not. Richard Cantillon, a brilliant Irish-French economist from the early 1700s, observed a crucial truth. When new money is injected into an economy, it does not spread evenly like water filling a tub. Instead, it flows like a river, reaching certain points first. Those closest to the source of the new money, typically the government, large banks, and the connected elites, get to spend it first. They purchase assets and goods at yesterday's prices, before the inflationary effects have taken hold. By the time that new money trickles all the way down to the average worker, saver, and retiree, prices have already surged. The first in line get the benefit. The last in line get the bill. The Cantillon effect is the hidden engine behind why money printing seems to enrich Wall Street while simultaneously punishing Main Street. It is why the massive quantitative easing after the 2008 crisis inflated stock and real estate markets to the moon, while wages for most people went nowhere. And it is why those stimulus checks seem to evaporate into thin air, eaten up by higher costs for groceries and gas. Inflation is not just a rising number, it is a massive, silent transfer of wealth. And you can bet you are not on the receiving end of that transfer. And the most infuriating part is that this is not a bug in the system, it is a feature. The entire mechanism is engineered to channel benefits upward, all while cleverly disguising the cost as a natural phenomenon called rising prices. Ordinary people feel like they are being robbed blind, but they cannot identify the thief because the crime scene is the entire economy. The Cantillon effect is the secret rigging at the heart of the modern financial world, and it has been in operation since the very first king decided to mint a new coin to pay his soldiers. The wealthy do not just earn more money, they literally receive it through a different, more privileged channel. This brings us to the next, equally insidious law. If the Cantillon effect explains how new wealth flows uphill, then financial repression explains how the government ensures you can never climb out of the valley. This term was popularized after World War II, a time when nations were suffocating under mountains of war debt with no easy way out. Drastically raising taxes would have caused a rebellion, and defaulting on their debts would have shattered their credibility on the world stage. So they devised a third, much quieter option: trap their citizens' capital within the system and then systematically drain its value over time. Here is the playbook. Central banks would force interest rates to be artificially low, frequently holding them below the actual rate of inflation. This guaranteed that any money you kept in a savings account was losing purchasing power every single year. At the same time, they implemented strict capital controls, making it difficult for you to move your money to other countries or invest in alternative assets like gold. Citizens were effectively locked in a cage, forced to accept negative real returns on their savings, which allowed their governments to slowly inflate away the value of their massive debts. It was a stealth tax, completely invisible to the untrained eye, but absolutely devastating to personal wealth over the long run. Now let us jump to the present day, and you will see the exact same strategy in action, just with a digital facelift. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, interest rates were pushed down to near zero and kept there for more than a decade. Savers were punished, earning next to nothing, while those who already owned assets like stocks and real estate saw their net worth explode. Then, from 2020 onward, rates were crushed again, and ordinary people watched in dismay as their savings were eroded by spiking prices for housing, food, and energy. Make no mistake, this was not some unfortunate accident. This was a deliberate policy. This was financial repression too. And the sheer genius of it, from a government's point of view, is that the vast majority of the population never even realized a specific policy was hurting them. They just felt poorer, more squeezed, and more anxious, without ever understanding precisely why. But these laws do not just dictate your personal financial health. They operate on the colossal scale of empires. This leads us to Triffin's paradox, also known as the reserve currency trap. In the 1960s, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin stood before the U.S. Congress and issued a stark warning. He pointed out a fundamental, fatal flaw in the global financial system. For the U.S. dollar to serve as the world's reserve currency, America had a unique obligation. It had to supply enough dollars to the rest of the world to finance international trade. This meant it was forced to run persistent trade deficits, essentially spending more money abroad than it earned. In the short term, this was a fantastic deal. The world desperately needed dollars, trust in the U.S. was high, and global commerce boomed. But Triffin saw the long-term danger. This arrangement, guaranteed future instability. The more dollars the United States sent overseas, the weaker the dollar's connection to its gold backing became, and the more fragile the entire system would grow over time. Triffin's prophecy came true in 1971, when President Richard Nixon officially severed the dollar's last link to gold, transforming it into a pure fiat currency backed by nothing but faith. Since that day, the United States has run enormous and chronic trade deficits, exporting paper dollars in exchange for tangible goods manufactured in other countries. Entire industries were hollowed out, factories closed, and national debt soared to unimaginable heights, but the dollar's dominant position in the world kept the whole show running. And here lies the brutal paradox. To maintain its status as the issuer of the world's reserve currency, the United States must continuously undermine its own domestic economic health. It is a law of money that ensures the slow, grinding decay of the empire at the center of the system. The consequences of this paradox are now impossible to ignore. America has become a nation that consumes far more than it produces, a lifestyle financed by a seemingly endless ability to borrow. The dollar's global dominance props up Wall Street and the financial sector, but has come at the expense of Main Street and industrial capacity. And now, for the first time in decades, serious challengers are circling. Nations like China and Russia are actively building alternative systems and settling trades in their own currencies. Central banks around the globe are buying physical gold at the fastest pace in over 50 years. The very system that granted the United States unparalleled power and privilege for generations now contains the seeds of its own undoing. That is the tragic irony of the Triffin paradox. The reserve currency is both the kingdom's crown and its curse. If Triffin's paradox shows how the entire global system is caught in a trap, then Goodhart's law explains why every bureaucratic attempt to manage it only makes things worse. In the 1970s, the economist Charles Goodhart made a simple but devastating observation. When a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Think about it. Governments and central banks are obsessed with statistics. They want inflation at precisely 2%, unemployment at 5%, and GDP growth at 3%. These numbers are supposed to be indicators that describe economic reality. But the moment politicians and bureaucrats decide that hitting a specific number is the goal itself, they begin to warp the entire system just to achieve that target, regardless of the real-world consequences. Let us take their obsession with a 2% inflation target. For decades, central bankers have sworn by this holy number. To achieve it, they have manipulated interest rates, flooded the system with liquidity, and inadvertently fueled one asset bubble after another. The official inflation number, the one they proudly pointed to, often remained low. But in the real world, the cost of essential things like housing, healthcare, and higher education soared at a much faster rate. The official metrics screamed stability, while the lived experience of millions of people screamed instability. The same goes for GDP. Politicians worship at the altar of GDP growth. But once growth itself became the overriding objective, governments began to justify piling on astronomical debts, offshoring entire industries, and inflating financial bubbles, all in the service of making that one number go up. The result is an illusion of prosperity that masks a reality of profound fragility. Goodhart's law reveals the ultimate bureaucratic trap. When you start managing the numbers, you stop measuring the truth. And this brings us to the final, unavoidable law on our journey, the law of diminishing returns on debt. This one is not ancient or elegant. It is just the cold, hard arithmetic of our modern age. In the early stages of an economy's development, taking on debt can be incredibly productive. You borrow $1, and you get $1 or more in real economic growth. But as the debt burden grows larger and larger over time, the effectiveness of each new dollar of debt plummets. Soon, that $1 of new debt only buys you 50 cents of growth, then 25 cents, and then Eventually, almost nothing. You reach a point where the debt continues to climb relentlessly, but real economic growth flatlines. The economic engine no longer accelerates. It just groans under its own colossal weight. We are living deep inside this stage right now. The U.S. national debt has surpassed $34 trillion, a number so large it has lost all meaning. Every new borrowing spree, every massive stimulus package produces less and less genuine wealth. Instead, it serves to prop up financial markets, fund government promises, and keep the illusion of solvency going for just a little longer. But the math is unforgiving. Reaching debt saturation is the endgame for every great power. The Romans debased their currency when their empire could no longer expand. The French monarchy borrowed its way into oblivion right before the Revolution of 1789. The British Empire buckled under the weight of its debts after 2 world wars. And now, America and much of the Western world face the same mathematical reckoning. This law is merciless. Borrowing can buy you time, but it can never buy you an escape. So when we take a step back and look at the whole picture, what do these unbreakable laws teach us? They teach us that money is not a magical construct of politics. It is governed by rules as real and as powerful as the law of gravity. Bad money will always drive out good until the system breaks. A full-blown crisis will always force people to seek refuge in real assets. New money will always enrich the powerful few before it ever reaches the working many. Governments will always be tempted to repress their citizens to quietly solve their debt problems. The world's reserve currency will inevitably hollow out the nation that issues it. Chasing statistical targets will always warp reality, and debt, in the end, will always consume the society that abuses it. These forgotten laws of money are not just some academic exercise. They are a survival guide for the world we live in. They are the reason why inflation feels like a thief in the night, why your wages never seem to keep up with the cost of living, why your mortgage feels heavier every year while financial markets hit record highs. They explain why nations rise on a foundation of sound money and trust, and why they crumble under the weight of deceit and debt. These are not random, chaotic events. They are the predictable, repeating rhythm of financial history. And here is the most difficult truth of all. The game was never, ever designed for you to win. The system operates under 2 sets of rules. Ordinary citizens are expected to live with complete transparency, while the elites operate under a veil of complexity and secrecy. You must file your taxes meticulously. They shift assets through sophisticated legal structures. You earn a wage. They are the first recipients of newly created money. You hold cash that is designed to lose value. They hold assets that are positioned to rise. The system is not broken. It is working perfectly according to its own laws. And if you do not learn them, you will always be playing blindfolded. History does not repeat itself, not exactly. But human nature is constant, and money always obeys its laws. If you fail to understand them, they will crush you all the same. If this has given you a new way to see the world, hit that subscribe button. The answers you are looking for are buried in the past, and I will show you where to dig.